Now, Chris and Carol will be explaining each of the 6 special considerations. When they are both finished, I will show you the parent input form that we've developed that parents can use with any type of meeting. All right, you're up.
Okay, thanks, Christine. This is Chris Ching. Carol and I are going to take turns going through each of the IDEA special considerations related to communication needs, especially when a child is deaf or hard of hearing. There are 6 special considerations under this section. I'm going to start us off with communication and language, a couple of the fundamentals of deaf education because they overlap with all the special considerations, given communication and language can impact other areas of development such as cognitive and social emotional skills. Let's begin by defining the difference between communication and language. I think it's important to spell them out because sometimes they're used interchangeably. Language is a set of rules and identifiers or words, signs capable of describing anything, including conceptual and time-related information. And communication is the transfer of information from one place, person, or thing to another, and may or may not utilize language to do so. For example, a baby can communicate it's hungry or in need of a diaper change, but doesn't use formal language to communicate that message. Same as gestural communication, like using a simple nod of the head to say hello or approve of something or agree with another person. Let's give focus to language first. Generally, people take this to mean the language used at home by family members, but we need to remember the child's first language, or L1, may be different than the parents'. There are children who don't have an established primary language, and this is particularly alarming when they show up in preschool with very limited language. We want to be sure that that the parent's primary language is not listed as the child's primary language on those student forms, if that's not the case. An action plan, like using a communication plan, is helpful for discussing the development and determination of L1 if this is in question. Several states do have a communication plan included in the IEP. Here in Washington, we can use it as a tool. By several languages, we mean that there are kids who may use several tools or modalities and languages to communicate. For example, a student may primarily use spoken language at home, but then use a different modality such as signing exact English or ASL in their school environment. We often say it's all about access. When it comes to learning, it is all about access to communication. So what's being taught and the individual learning experience can be absorbed by their bodies and brains for learning. So our kids have the same opportunities to learn as any other child does. Understanding how a child does or doesn't communicate is critical to designing appropriate instruction and services. A child's ability to understand and use language and communication plays a huge role in a child's ability to learn and make progress in the general education curriculum. Indeed, making sure a child has access by supporting communication needs can be pivotal to the child's participation and progress in academics and other school activities. This slide just reiterates the importance of having deaf ed specialists like a teacher of the deaf on the team. CDHL outreach consultants often hear, oh, she's just fine. She follows directions and has friends in class. But we know that hard of hearing children especially can fly under the radar because they can fake it because they're natural at visually following what's happening and can hear enough to look like they're listening, but really they're just following the leader, so to speak. And following or focusing on key phrases that they can hear, quote unquote, like line up, it's cleanup time, wash your hands. We want to know more precisely what is the nature, length, complexity, and context of the student's communication interaction. We know our deaf and hard of hearing kiddos can be adept at communication on the surface using body language and facial expressions especially, but digging deeper, what is the true language being used in the communication interactions? You may be thinking to yourself, what if a child who's deaf or hard of hearing is determined as ineligible for specialized support? We in education need to be accountable for children who are found ineligible for special ed and or 504 supports, especially when we know deaf and hard of hearing kids benefit from preschool. As an example, that's my area. Often or sometimes kids are evaluated by the school district and not found eligible. For example, family gets birth to 3 services, then their child is not eligible for preschool, but when it's time for kindergarten, delays have set in and now eligible for specially designed instruction. Students must make adequate progress, defined as 1 year's growth in 1 year's time. If a child is regressing or not making progress, the students have a right to request another evaluation. Here's a list of specific questions the IEP team should ask. This is taken from the Karen Anderson website, supportforkidswithhearingloss.com. It's a tremendous resource, although some of the language seems a little dated or more clinical in nature. Regardless, it is huge resource with lots of helpful information, checklists, articles, and tools. One of them, for example, is the Placement and Readiness Checklist, or the PARC, P-A-R-C. You should go and check it out. But we also need to keep in mind that we need to have backup plans ready, like what do you do if the interpreter calls in sick? Or what if the cochlear implant or hearing aid breaks during the day? I'll read through some of these action plan or accommodations that are more common for deaf and hard of hearing kids. Having an educational interpreter who's fluent in the sign language or modality during instruction, use of an FM system, whether that's personal or sound field system. We can look at classroom acoustics and the visual environment, adding sign language or spoken language acquisition goals on the IEP, having some different assessments like functional listening evaluation, using classroom captioning, and note takers. The National Hands and Voices has a great tool when considering supports students might need called IEP and 504 Accommodations and Modifications Checklist. That's on their website, handsandvoices.org. The functional listening evaluation can also be found on that Hands and Voices website. Also, many of these are listed on the IEP or 504 checklist. By the way, our own Washington Hands and Voices chapter is providing a training educational advocacy workshop on March 23rd at Central Washington University in Ellensburg. So please see our Washington Hands and Voices website for more details and registration information. That's wahandsandvoices.org. I mentioned before, other states have adapted communication plans into their IEP forms. There's several examples out there, like from Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, using the communication repair strategies by Karen Anderson, repetition, revision, addition, and nonverbal. But when we're looking at note takers, sometimes a peer note taker is appropriate, and other times a professional note taker is required using CART or Typewell captioning services.